I'm joined by Councilmember O'Farrell, Mr. Krikorian, and Mr. Koretz.
This one.
Mr. Clerk, we're going to go ahead and start. I'm going to go ahead and start. And I'm going to take public comment and general public comment at this time. So the following people have signed up to speak on all items, including general public comment. Susan Rocha, are you here? Can you please come to the table, ma'am? Melissa Aguayo. Melissa, did you sign up for all the items?
Yeah, I actually am adjusting that for item 1 and 2.
So you just want to speak order 1 and 2. Okay, let's just hold on you then. So Susan, are you the only one that wants to speak on all items? Everyone else is here for item 1 and 2? Okay. All right, so go ahead, Susan. I'm going to give you 3 minutes because you're going to speak 2 minutes. You can speak on all items, and then I'm going to go ahead and give you your 1 minute for general public comment for a total of 3 minutes.
Well, I don't know what the agenda is.
You don't know what the agenda is?
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not so familiar with.
Okay. Well, it appears from what you signed on to speak on that you signed on to speak on all the items.
Okay, can I go find out what all the items are then?
Sure. Why don't we, if you just, do you want to just give your general public comment? Okay, then you have 1 minute to do that. Here's the agenda. So do you want to just go ahead and speak on general public comment so I can give you your 1 minute? Is that okay? All right, so to give her 1 minute general public comment. As soon as she's done, I'm going to call the speakers for items number 1 and 2. Does that make sense? Go ahead.
Is it possible to get 1 extra minute?
I can't hear you.
Is it possible to get 1 extra minute?
No, I can't. Unless you sign up for an item, I can only give you 1 minute of general public comment.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm here because I have a noise problem, and my civil rights are being violated because the LA City Attorney says that the Catholic Church, Divine Savior, can blast their noise into my home whenever they feel like it. But they've put up 4 bullhorns and blast off-key tape recordings all day, several times a day. And that's not what the municipal code says, but that's what the city attorney says, that it's legal. That's a violation of my civil rights, that I have to hear their tape-recorded music, their off-key God Bless America, and anything else they want to play, even though there's not a soul around. There's no church services, there's nobody there, but I've been fighting this for a very long time, that I shouldn't have to hear it. The church has taken me to court twice to shut me up. Twice they lost. This last time accused me of a crime I didn't commit, which I went to a jury trial and fought and won. But if you think that's fun, it's not. And this committee, or whoever makes these rules, needs to clarify Chapter 11, Article 5, Section 115.02b.
Okay,
because that's not okay to force me to have church service.
Thank you very much.
In my own home.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and call speakers for item numbers 1 and 2.
General public comment.
And your general public comment cards as well. So I have 4 mics there, so I'm going to call 4 speakers at a time. Adina Tesler, are you here? David Wishoff? Beth Mcnamara? Beth, are you here? And Melissa Aguayo. So did you want to also speak, have a general public comment? So 2 minutes for your 2 items, from 1 and 2. Okay, very well. So we're going to go ahead and start with Adina and then make our way down. Go ahead, you have 2 minutes, go ahead.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm here today on behalf of the California Restaurant Association. You do have before you a letter that we submitted on the council file. We submitted it on item 1 related to the straws, but this is also pertinent to item 2. As you know, the California Restaurant Association represents over 2,000 members throughout Southern California. And the restaurant industry actively supports recycling efforts, actively supports litter abatement in our communities, and we care very much about these issues, particularly since we are the ones that have to enforce them and do training and change the rules in our own restaurants to make sure that whatever policy you decide, we implement. So we've offered some additional thoughts and solutions about how to go about changing behavior when it comes to the use of plastic straws and the waste of plastic straws. First of all, we wanted to point out that the county recently introduced a similar motion, but their motion, rather than an offer, a request, is an offer. on the employee side. We find that a little bit more palatable because we feel like we can retrain employees to do that, and it would be less upsetting and frustrating to the consumers. In addition to that, we want to make sure that as we go down the road of writing policy for food packaging, that we use some consistency, that we don't have a different set of rules for condiments versus utensils versus straws, because trying to enforce that and trying to change behavior in many different ways is going to be very confusing for everyone. In addition, we want to make sure that the packaging policy remains material neutral so that family-owned restaurants aren't looking to pay exorbitant costs for very expensive alternatives. And also dispensers are very important to us. It's important that people have the option to take one straw for their one drink and not have to get back in line if for some reason they don't ask for one.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Beth McNamara, and I happen to be in the building, so I decided to attend the meeting. And this is what I carry with me all the time. I carry a set of utensils, and I carry a metal straw. And I do this because I have 2 children, and one of them is currently on a beach cleanup in San Diego. And my kids walk the beach and say, how can there be so much trash? Why is there so much plastic? There doesn't need to be, and to have any discussion where it's such a burden to retrain employees not to give out straws, what kind of message are we sending to people in our own community and to future generations? You don't need a straw to survive. You don't need plastic utensils to survive. I also carry a water bottle with me everywhere, and I refuse to accept a plastic straw in a restaurant. I don't think it is a lot for Los Angeles to try and lead the way on this issue. It's very simple. Plastic straws are not recyclable. Everybody knows that, and we have to stop somewhere. So I'm glad you guys were holding this meeting, and I was in the building. I will also be at the 2:15 meeting trying to save some trees, because that's what we all have to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, go ahead.
Dave Wiesoff. I represent both San Fernando Valley Audubon Society and also in the Valley and International Bird Rescue, where we take care of sick and injured and orphaned and oiled birds in San Pedro. One preamble, I just spent the morning at a middle school in the San Fernando Valley explaining to middle schoolers, 200 of them in an auditorium, thank you very much, about plastic waste and how waste gets in the ocean as a result of watershed activities, et cetera, and how they can keep the ocean safe, healthy, and clean by picking up the trash, not throwing trash in the street. Also, kudos to the chairman for your efforts, your office efforts in supporting the Coastal Cleanup Day. I had a very, very small part in that by helping facilitate the Lake Balboa program, et cetera, and I was very active with San Fernando Valley in coastal cleanup activity at the nature reserve. Of course, representing birds and wildlife in general, the issue relates to the incredible amount of plastic that goes into the world's oceans, and from a very narrow perspective, the impact on millions of seabirds. And I represent the albatrosses that are surface feeders, and the fulmars that dive down, and the pelicans, and all the other species of aquatic birds, especially seabirds, but also our work in San Fernando Valley doing 2 beach cleanups, inland cleanups at the Sepulveda Basin Wildlife Reserve every year. I can attest to the incredible amount of plastic that is coming from picnickers, they're normal people in the San Fernando Valley, in the Sepulveda Basin, because we clean up Haskell Creek. And Haskell Creek, of course, is a very quick tributary of the Los Angeles River. We do that twice a year, and we take 500 pounds of trash out of Haskell Creek twice a year. And so the amount of plastic that goes into the LA River and into the ocean is just horrendous. And so anything we can do to encourage using recyclable utensils, et cetera, we sincerely appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Melissa Aguayo. I'm here with the 5 Gyres Institute. Thank you all so much for meeting on this. I think that we are seeing more and more of these policies come through because people are becoming more aware of how plastic is impacting us. And while I'm with Beth, I bring my own reusable items everywhere I go. We need to make it as easy on people to make the right choice. So we strongly encourage, instead of having these piecemeal ordinances, having one really comprehensive one. I did bring our Better Alternatives Now list. We are big believers in using data and finding solutions using that science. So we took different data sets. We looked at not just prevalence, but we also looked at toxicity. How toxic are these items? We know for a fact that there's certain plastic items that are toxic, things like polystyrene. We also looked at how easy is it to recover these items, right? Once they make their way out into the street, out into our watersheds, out into the ocean, it's too late to even talk about cleanups for a lot of these items. So when we look at things like utensils, things like straws, that makes up 15% of the total items that we picked up. These are hundreds of thousands of items that are making their way into our waterways, into our oceans, impacting animals, and moving their way up the food chain to us. It's littering our communities, and it's having a direct impact in that way. So I'm happy to pass this around so you all can take a look. When we look at things that are tied to food packaging, it's more than 25%. So putting these things in place will help us all make better choices, because not everybody's going to want to bring their own reusable cup, right? So let's encourage people to make the right choice, and we want to see restaurants succeed, and we've seen strong data that shows that these policies, while they might be a little bit difficult, change is always hard, we have seen that it does save these restaurants money in the long run once they adopt these things into place. Oh, I still have time. And yeah.
You covered everything.
Thank you. Yeah.
And you did it under 2 minutes.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to call the next 4 speakers. Letty Slover. Letty, are you here?
Yeah.
Come on up. Lendy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I mispronounced that.
Oh, don't worry.
Michael Doshi. Juliana Fong. Juliana Fong, are you here? And Patrick Migliazzo. Patrick.
Hey.
Okay, Lindy, you want to start, and then we'll just go down the road. You want to start first? Lindy, go ahead. You have 2 minutes. So did you sign up for items 1 and 2?
Yeah.
Did. Okay, so go ahead and you have 2 minutes. Any of you want to speak for general public comment, or are you all here on an item?
Yeah, 1 and 2.
1 and 2. Okay, so 2 minutes. Go ahead, Lindy.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for being here and hearing us out. I think you can see there's a pretty big group of passionate people here that do want to see less waste on the streets in LA. As you guys probably know from the first rain, there's a ton of videos and things that you would think are in other places that are not LA, but it's so much waste that's going into our ocean, and we know that's partially due to our drainage system, which is also a separate measure. But just in general, I want to talk a little bit about cost, too. The cost to the city, I'm sure you guys are aware, is astronomical to clean up all of this debris that's in the streets. Most of it being plastic, most of it can become either biodegradable, compostable, and or recyclable. Once we get back on the recycling train and we'll really convince China to take our plastic, that won't happen. So we still have a huge thing to accomplish. So last year on Coastal Cleanup Day, in 3 hours alone, we picked up 23,000 pounds of trash. And that's just 3 hours in LA. So that's pretty substantial. The cost annually for US alone is $11.5 billion, which is, pretty crazy. And also with Caltrans, it said it spent $76 million to remove 9,500 garbage trucks worth of trash in 2015. So those are just a very few amount of statistics to get us into the millions and billions of dollars we spend simply cleaning up trash. And lastly, a report from the Homeowners Association said that people do value their houses at a decreased level when they're in neighborhoods that have substantially higher amounts of trash. So I think it's just a very cyclical system that we're living in, and if we can tackle the debris problem and find solutions that are compostable, biodegradable, and recyclable, we as a city can save money and live in a more sustainable way.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Doshi. I am the Youth Leadership Programs Manager at Aguayo Marine Research and Education out of Long Beach here in California. I've been a resident of Los Angeles for over 12 years, and Aguayo, the organization I work for, are the ones that discovered what you know as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in the North Pacific Gyre between here and Hawaii. So we've been doing research on plastic pollution on land and in the ocean for over 20 years. And I thought Long Beach city council members were the most good-looking group of city councilors I've ever seen, but it is indeed you guys. So thank you so much for having me here today.
I saw Mr. Cedillo. Mr. Cedillo is a good-looking guy here. Yeah.
You are. I am here to talk to you today about inspiring versus requiring change. Working with young people, my job is to inspire them to create solutions to plastic pollution on a systemic change. Inspiration can also move to requiring change, which is what you are here to do today, and to move forward with in the city of Los Angeles. Where we're at right now in the movement against plastic pollution is like, to ask the public to take responsibility for this on their own is like putting a cookie jar full of double fudge chocolate chip cookies in front of a chocoholic and expecting them not to eat it. It's not going to happen with where we're at in our society right now. So we need regulators and legislators such as yourself to help implement changes that will move to more systemic change. So with straws and utensils, upon request only, I would like to see more of a comprehensive ordinance such as what Berkeley, California is currently proposing to move forward with moving to items that all have to be potentially recyclable and moving to reusables for sit-down restaurants. So upon request is a great start, but I would like to see a more comprehensive movement as this is inevitably going to happen. It's going to happen. And you guys have the opportunity to be the change makers and set the pace for it. Thank you so much for my time, and I hope you guys make the best decision that you can.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Juliana Fong, and I'm a freshman at Westridge School for Girls. And I would really urge you to vote in favor of the city's straw on request ordinance. I first became aware of the problem of plastic polluting our environment when we saw a film called A Plastic Ocean in school. The film showed how all of the plastic items we use for food packaging, including straws, ends up in landfills and in the ocean. The film showed that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that is filled with tons of plastic. In fact, there's more plastic than plankton now. And this plastic breaks down into small particulates that gets into the food chain, which includes humans. And none of us really wants plastic in their seafood. And I don't know if you've seen it, but most people have watched the famous YouTube video where a plastic straw is being pulled out of a sea turtle's bloody nose. So why should a sea turtle suffer in exchange for our convenience? Most of us can live without plastic straws. They're just a habit we need to break. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for being here. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Patrick. I'm a resident of Los Angeles. I've lived here for 29 years, and I'm a member of the Los Angeles Surfrider chapter. And I, along with other members of my chapter, started a beach cleanup just south of Gladstones along PCH. Most of you probably know it. There's an area that's full of rocks where there's a surfing point break there. And this Sunday is our 12th beach cleanup in that location. I came up with the idea with a friend that's here tonight, Graham, and we just kind of ran with it. And after 11 cleanups, this will be our 12th, we picked up over 6,000 pounds of trash in an area that's less than 200 yards long. It's an area that doesn't have a sandy beach because we built a seawall there a long time ago, so there's no sand, so no one goes down there, so no one notices the trash. Only the surfers who go down there and the people who go down there to drink beer and eat their fast food and leave their trash behind notice it. I'm really passionate about that place because it's where my home is, it's where I surf, and it's part of me. But all I can do is put a Band-Aid on this bleeding problem that we have. I can't stop the bleeding. That's kind of your guys' role. So I like activating people. I've had probably over 500 volunteers come out over the last year that have come to this place, and we do a happy hour afterwards, and we try and make it fun and enjoyable. But all we're doing is putting a Band-Aid. So two of the ordinances on here, the plastic straws on request and the plastic utensils on request. Thank you guys for those. Those are one more step in the right direction, but to me it's just one more Band-Aid on the bleeding problem, right? It's, plastic straws on request, but the person who requests it still gets their plastic straw, and that plastic straw still ends up in a landfill. So why? You know, there's other cities that are going to be the first ones, right? Why not have LA be that first city? Why not have LA say, no more plastic straws, no more plastic to go where, not just on request. So thank you guys for your time, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. I have one more public comment speaker. Graham Hamilton, are you here? Anyone else wish to speak? Mr. Hamilton, you want to come up? Number 4. Okay, anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, right after our last speaker, I will close public comment. That's why I'm asking. So, Mr. Hamilton, you've requested to speak on item 1 and 2?
Correct.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'm Hamilton, Chapter Coordinator for the Surfrider Foundation Los Angeles Chapter. Would like to thank Chair Martinez and Councilmember Koretz and the committee here, but especially you two for your leadership in the city's zero waste initiatives. As was mentioned earlier, last week Angelinos got their first and long-anticipated rains of the season. The first rains are always a welcome in our increasingly parched region, but with heavy rains comes massive amounts of pollution to our creeks, streets, and coastlines. Efforts to reduce plastic pollution upstream before it has a chance to enter the environment are critical. And I'm very happy that this committee is considering a straws and utensils upon request ordinance. But as was mentioned earlier, I think that we do need to go further. After the UN government panel's report on climate change that was recently released, it is clear that we need to take bold steps to fully address the ecological crises of our time. We need bold action to cut emissions, and we need bold action to address the amount of waste that we produce and consume annually. It no longer makes sense to address individual products that are contributing to a much larger problem. We need comprehensive action that safeguards our communities and our environments while supporting new green economies and incentivizing sustainable consumer lifestyles. We can achieve these goals by focusing on comprehensive initiatives that work to eliminate non-recyclable and non-compostable single-use disposables from the consumer stream at restaurants in the city of Los Angeles. Through our Ocean Friendly Restaurants program, the Surfrider Foundation has worked with over 600 restaurants nationwide, many of them right here in Los Angeles, to adopt business practices that eliminate single-use plastics from the consumer stream. Through surveys conducted by our chapters, our ocean-friendly restaurants report annual savings in the thousands of dollars after making the switch to eco-friendly foodware alternatives and reusable dining ware. This is not merely about the environment. It's also about saving businesses money by doing what's right for the community. So I encourage you to go forward, but take it a little bit further. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have one last speaker, Teresa Sanchez. Anyone else wishing to speak today? You already spoke, ma'am. Anyone else? Okay, after Ms. Sanchez speaks, we will close public comment. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm sorry. You're only speaking on item number 4, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so 1 minute. Restart her clock. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Teresa Sanchez, and I'm with AFSCME District Council 36 and the Coalition of LA City Unions. And we just wanted to speak to item 4 to let you know that we do not oppose transitional employment. We understand the importance of programs such as Chrysalis operates to help homeless individuals and formerly incarcerated individuals reintegrate into the community and obtain the skills and the stability to be able to obtain full-time employment. However, we do oppose the outsourcing of city work, and that's what this is. This is regular Bureau of Sanitation work. This is clean streets work. And I do fear, frankly, that this is a slippery slope, that before you know it, they're going to be doing Bureau of Street Services work, they're going to be doing median islands and lot cleaning. So we don't oppose transitional employment and partnering with organizations in the community that do that. We hope that they will prepare folks to enter our targeted local hire program once they've achieved that stability and are ready to work full-time for the city. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so that concludes public comment for all items, including general public comment. Members, I'd like to go ahead and approve items 4 through 6 on consent. Are there any objections? No. Seeing none, that will be the order.
Item 4.
Say that again?
I'd like to speak to item 4.
All right, hold on for just, so Mr. Cedillo, what did you want to speak on? So you want to both speak on item number 4, so let me go ahead and move the rest of the items on consent, items 5 and 6. Is there any objection?
No.
Seeing none, okay, we have questions for item number 4. Is there anybody here from the, do you want to ask staff questions? I'm not even sure if anyone here is available for questions. Anyone here from the department? There we are. The CEO's office, come on.
Wilson Poon from the CAO's office.
Please introduce yourself for the record, sir. And we can start with Mr. Koretz. What is your name, sir?
My name is Wilson Kuhn with the CAO's office.
Mr. Koretz?
Yeah, I'm generally happy with the concept of helping people in need, but I want to know more about the program. How do we make sure the participants are paid a fair wage? Are they given proper equipment for what they're doing? How long will they be employed? How will the whole thing work? Because I don't want to just buy into something without knowing the details.
Sure. So it's a one-year program, and there's about 36 positions that we're recommending here, 6 crews, 1 for each of the 6 district yards. I also have representatives from Chrysalis here who can probably talk more about their program itself. But if you look at page 4, there's a chart, there's a table that breaks down the equipment, the supplies needed, the salaries that are going to be paid to these employees. It looks like a $2.9 million program. About $2 million of that is going back to these individuals. There's some one-time costs as well, and some equipment, rental of vehicles, and tip fees, and all other stuff. So there's a pretty comprehensive breakdown on page 4. If they do get benefits, I believe they get sick benefits. I don't think they get vacation or holidays. So it's supplementing city staff. The motion that was introduced by Council members Buscaino and Blumenfield and second by Councilwoman Martinez here kind of talked about this need for additional city services. Our clean stat data kind of shows that as many crews as we've been providing the Bureau and through the budget process, that there's still a great need and demand for some loose litter cleanups and weed abatements around the city. So we're hoping to deploy these crews based on the clean stat data. If we can filter out the areas of the city that have repeated, overgrown weeds or loose litter, we can deploy them to these areas.
And do we have plans to transition these workers to targeted local hire and give them a chance to actually work in real city jobs?
So the target local hire and this pilot program are mutually exclusive. The departments, when they participate, and I can report that Sanitation has been participating in the target local hire program. They've filled a lot of positions through the program recently. They cannot, I guess, randomly select certain criteria who they want. They can't select for people who have weed abatement or loose litter experience. They kind of get a random set of people that they interview for employment opportunities. So that's kind of, it's great if they're able to participate in this pilot and they get that experience and those skills. It definitely will help them, gain long-term employment. But
so I think we're talking about the reverse. So they do this program, they develop some skills, and then we're not going to let them participate in targeted local hire.
They may or may not. It's random. So they randomly receive people that they interview. It could be someone who was a past participant of the program, but it may not be. And I think it's because these are all entry-level positions. The way the framework of the Target Local Hire program was set up was we didn't want to kind of give preference or to certain individuals, or they wanted everyone to have the fair opportunity to compete for these positions.
Yeah, it strikes me as a little strange. I think if ideally there was a way to get these two programs to work together so that this could be the first step of a targeted local hire, and then they were actually able to transition into the program, I think that would be a more productive use of the individuals and what training we wind up giving them.
I mean, I'm not sure if we track it or if Chrysalis tracks or Sanitation of how many people that they pick up off the Target Local Hire program might have been a past participant. We could probably track that in the pilot and come back after a year and see how many transition from this pilot to the Target Local Hire program. And that is something we could ask them to report back.
And this is just additional activity and cleanup that we wouldn't be doing otherwise. This isn't taking any positions from what otherwise would be city workers doing the same thing.
Right. And our office is planning to prepare an addendum to this report because at the time the report was prepared, there was no funding allocated in the mayor's proposed budget, but through the Budget and Finance Committee action, there was about $10 million included in the UB for homelessness services, this pilot program being under that umbrella. So there is a funding source that's been identified, and at the time the report was written, there was no funding identified. Hopefully we can get that report before it goes to Budget and Finance Committee.
Well, I have to admit I'm not 100% comfortable with it, but we'll hear what the rest of the discussion is like.
All right, are you done, Mr.
Yes.
Kurtz? Did you want to ask questions of Chrysalis? Because did I understand correctly? Are they here? Do you want to just come up to the table, sir, in case you want to jump in and answer any questions or clear up any misunderstandings?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Trevor Kill with Chrysalis.
Okay, thank you for being here. Mr. Cedillo?
Yes, so I'm a little more definitive. I think the program's great. I think the training's great. But the point is, once we get past the training, if there's work to be done, we should hire. And so if you tell us that there's money in the budget now, then we should move forward and expand the workforce. We had, my understanding, tremendous cutbacks during the recession. There's a huge amount of vacancies that have not been refilled. Commitments were made. We haven't fulfilled those. So one is what we should hire once the program's resolved or completed. The second is I just want to make a clear statement that we should not be displacing any current city workers. And so that this is, as it's been stated, supplemental work, additional work, work that needs to be done but that we're not currently doing, that then we should be very clear that it's not the intention of this proposal to displace anyone in the current workforce, and say that very clearly and execute that.
Mr. Koretz, I know you're, I'm sorry, Mr. Krikorian, I know you want to say something about this.
So this is a program similar to something that I've been wanting to launch in my own district as well, first of all. And we've had great experience with Chrysalis in my district, coordinating job training and housing vouchers in a very directed program, which has had great success, bringing, I think, 25% of participants into unsubsidized employment already, which is, it's just been a great success. So there are going to be people who are participating in this program who will be absolutely ready to go into targeted local hire at the conclusion of this program. There will be others who can participate in this program who will never, ever, ever be able to participate in city employment because they just don't have the kinds of soft skills, stability, and otherwise to be. So if we're going to move forward with this as an apprenticeship for public employment, this is not what this program is. This is putting dollars in the pocket so that people who will die on the streets can buy food for themselves. That's right. That's what this program is for me. So, and if in the process of doing that, we happen to find people who will be career ready, well, then that's going to be a wonderful thing. But that's not my first, in my view of what the first objective of this should be. We don't have anybody, as far as I know, who's currently a city employee who's engaged in loose litter cleanup, do we?
Well, I mean, we have our clean street teams that is part of their job.
When they're out picking up bulky items and doing other things, they will have somebody there who also sweeps up the loose. But we don't have people going from block to block picking up trash. Out of the 30,000 employees we have in the city, we have no one doing that now, right?
So we have a similar program with the Clean Streets program. With every Clean Streets team, there's about $300,000 allocated for OCB, Office of Community Beautification. Yeah. So once, sanitation comes through, cleans up the alley, there's these smaller teams of graffiti abaters that come by and kind of maintain it in a lot of ways. So.
Yeah, under grants that we give to the OCB providers, yeah. The one issue that I have with this, and I'm going to save further discussion about it until it comes to budget and finance, but I think this is really important. I think we should do it broadly. I think if a homeless person wants to work, even if it's just for one day, we should give them the opportunity to work for that one day and feed themselves and produce a public good at the same time, especially because this work is not displacing any public employees. It doesn't even have the potential to. And for all the things I said earlier about our great relationship, this appears to me to be a very expensive program. This is coming out to almost $100,000 per position. And that, to me, is mind-bogglingly expensive. And it is sole-sourced as well. I think there's a great opportunity to find creative ways to be able to do this work and to help these folks for less money. And if programs are going to be this expensive, then we should just be hiring full-time people to do it and forgetting about the homeless population and just staffing up and performing our services. That's so, you know, maybe if you want to speak to the cost now, that's fine. If not, we can do it in budget and finance when we're better prepared to have a fuller discussion about that. But I am concerned this is a boatload of money that we're spending on a pilot program that, you know, as I see it, doesn't pencil out really, given the number of people that are being served.
So I can speak to it briefly. I think two of the $3 million go into the pockets of the men and women who will be working in the program, right? So they're going to be making that money in income, which to me is money very well spent. The other thing to consider is that Chrysalis currently operates 16 business improvement district contracts to do this type of work all around the city of Los Angeles. And that's the cost of doing business. You know, there's real wages involved here. There's vehicles we have to buy. There's equipment that we have to buy. We're a nonprofit organization, not in the business of making money, but we're in the business of covering costs. So the program is intended to create employment, get the work done for cheaper than the city can get the work done if they had to go above and beyond what they're currently doing, and also do a really good community service at the same time.
Okay. Are there any other questions, members? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and move to approve the recommendations of the CAO's office. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that will be the order. Thank you very much. All right, let's move on. So that takes care of item 4, 5, and 6. Let's go ahead and move on to item number 3. Can go ahead and, Mr. Prieto, read that item into the record, and if I can ask Mr. Wright. I didn't recognize you with that beard, sir.
You know, you grow hair where it chooses.
Are you getting ready for winter? Is that what's happening?
Exactly. Thank you.
So why don't we go ahead and read the item into the record, and then we can have the presentation.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Item number 3, motion O'Farrell, Ryu, Martinez, Wesson, relative to request of the Department of Water and Power to report regarding the July 6, 2018 heat storm and power outage occurrence and related matters.
All right, so members, this item's got to do with the weekend of, what's happening back there? This item has to do with the weekend of July 6th, where we had an unusual heat wave hit Los Angeles. Is that correct, Mr. Wright?
Yes, we did.
I think for the first time since I can remember, this side of Los Angeles got hit with the hardest, one of the hardest heat waves in the history of the city.
Absolutely. Very
Usually
unusual.
it's the San Fernando Valley who gets hit hard, but
exactly.
It was unusual.
Here it was,
so that's why you're here.
Yeah.
So you want to go ahead and I think you passed out the presentation, correct?
Yes, and I will get through this quickly.
All right. This motion was also introduced by Mr. O'Farrell and Mr. Ryu. And so, Mr. Wright, you want to go ahead and start off? Before you do that, Mr. O'Farrell, did you have any opening comments regarding this item since you were one of the authors of the motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to frame it really quickly, I want to thank Mr. Wright for the DWP's quick response to this request. We had an unprecedented heat event, and I think we can expect many more of these into the future. And what concerned myself and many others, probably everyone on this panel, is I think we were kind of caught flat-footed in terms of communication and left with an inadequate literal physical response and communication response. Not casting blame here, because on my street in Glassell Park it was 116 degrees. And so that is extreme on any day of the year, much less when you live in the Los Angeles basin. I think that is a harbinger of things that we can expect in the future. And we had some very serious issues in all the neighborhoods that were affected very harshly. And I just want to make sure that we're prepared in word and in deed for the next heat event, because they're coming. And I think this is an opportunity for us to really put the building blocks in place so that we're not caught so flat-footed next time around. So with that, thank you for preparing this report for us today.
Thank you. And to kind of respond to what you said, we will have more of these events, but we're working hard to reduce the number of these events. And we have a power system reliability plan. We put in over $2.3 billion in the last 3 years in working on infrastructure. This and the next slide essentially says and shows a lot of what happened. When you have a reduction in investment in your infrastructure, the reduction in reliability and the number of outages doesn't hit the next year. It hits 10 years from then. And what you can see here is the first bar is 1991 on the left. About $500 million in total was being put into power infrastructure. And what you can see, instead of that ramping up, which it should have been, it was ramping down. And it truly wasn't until about the mid-2000s where it slowly started ramping back up. But it truly wasn't until the leadership of this council, the mayor and the board, approving increased levels of infrastructure investment over the last several years that we've really started addressing a problem that was created 15 and 20 years ago. That was our total investment. This is the investment in just power reliability. And again, what you could see, it wasn't until about the last 3 to 4 years where this significantly started ramping up. So again, the leadership of the council really helped us obtain the funding to increase the infrastructure investment and again, make up for decades of time, mostly, again, 15, 20, 25 years ago. So we set this power system reliability program, or you'll hear me say PSRP. We've established goals here, several items of what we're looking at replacing. We're exceeding our goals. Just so you know, I asked staff, well, if we're exceeding our goals, can we, increase our goals? The reality is these goals are set by the number of staff we have. We can't really take our goals and increase them too much more until we hire additional staff, which we are doing. We've done a lot of priorities. We looked at the investment in what can create the biggest number of customers out and started there, which are mostly transformers, circuit breakers, distribution level circuit breakers, which are the systems that serve a large number of customers. We replaced a number of them. This is Mayor Garcetti and my beardless face on the right, or back of it, revisiting the infrastructure and investment. There are two measures that every utility makes, and it's called, it's called SAIDI and safety, but what it is how often is there an outage, and when there's an outage, how long does it last? On this slide, this is LEDWP is blue, and then Pacific Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric. And what you'll see is weather does influence. San Diego, with their weather, tends to have fewer outages, and when they have them, they don't last very long because they have fewer outages. But what you can see is LEDWP's numbers, except for that windstorm, were going down until about 2013 when the lack of investment started catching up, and then you can see year over year it's going, there's more outages a year. And when there's an outage, again, what you can see is the time that a customer is out has been going down, but again, about 5 years ago, it started ramping up as the impacts were felt for the lack of investment 15 to 20 years ago. This heat storm, very sudden and extreme record temperatures. We had over 750 outages. Here's kind of the big fact that this never happens. When 4,000 customers were impacted at 4, and 5 hours later, it had grown to 46,000 customers. They have to be restored by staff. You've got to have the people, and the impact was so significant. We went up basically to what we call a response level 3, which is like what we'd usually have a response for a big earthquake. I mean, we had that many customers out. We have been having climate extremes, and this was one of them. If you look on this 3-day, Friday, highest day usage of electricity ever in July. The Saturday, the second highest weekend day we'd ever experienced. Sunday, the fourth highest Sunday of all time. What we're finding out is climate change talks about a slow increase in temperatures, but during that slow increase, there are climate extremes where we're having major things that have never happened before. Water, driest year in 2016, then the extreme of the wettest year the next year. Highest peak in history, August 17. Hottest day ever in LA was in 2010, which isn't too long ago, but what you'll see is during this heat storm, we got really close to the downtown LA record. We ended up, again, having a whole bunch of outages, but the middle bullet is kind of the key one. There were 5 times the outages in essentially downtown, Koreatown, the west side, versus the valley, and it never happens. This is Andy Kendall, who essentially runs our field crews and has been working at the department for 30 years, and he's told me, never seen this in the entire time. And we got to the point on Saturday and Sunday where we are telling customers it takes 24 to 48 hours before we can get you back on. I'm going to tell you a very strong fact that nobody wants to hear. We have no idea how long an outage is going to take to fix when we first show up, but we can start making estimates. And some of those estimates have to do with this. This is a very basic but very important item. When there's overhead lines, there are more outages, but because you can see where the outage is, you can go fix it more quickly. When there's underground lines, the outages occur much less frequently, but when there's an outage, you've got to figure out where that outage or where the problem is on the system by sectionalizing the system, and the repair takes a lot longer. During a normal heat wave, day 1, it's hot. Day 2, it's hotter. It just keeps getting hotter throughout the 5-day period, and then it kind of breaks and it's over. And that's what heat waves are like. This was like we had day 1, and then we had the hottest day of the heat wave the next day. And what you can see, Thursday it was 88 degrees in downtown LA. Friday it was 108 degrees. 103 degrees in the valley on Thursday, 117 the next day. The heat hit, and then it slowly started going down. Again, it's almost like the entire heat wave was reversed. And what you can see is the number of customers impacted, and it really peaked at kind of the evening of the first day with 46,000 customers. And that's what you can see is the customers impacted. Then staff was working on repairs, but it took up to 48 hours to slowly decrease to the point of where Monday pretty much everybody was restored. This shows the customers impacted in the kind of orange line. You can see it peaking and then going down, and then the restoration low and then going up. Again, number of customers at any given time. This shows the most impacted. And again, this isn't what history has ever exhibited in the past, with way more outages downtown compared to the San Fernando Valley. Here's the other most effective areas are the darker ones. When there's an outage, there's a lot more than people, the staff just runs out, climbs up a pole or goes down a hole and fixes something. You start with a traffic plan. You then go down in the vault. It can reach up to 160 degrees in one of those vaults, and staff works about 15 minutes, and then they come back up. And you can see here we vent down there to try and reduce the temperature. Here's another venting. There's this cable. When you put cable into an underground system, you have to pull the old cable out. You have to clean the conduit, and then you have to pull the new cable in. And that's what you can see. There's a whole group of new cable, a whole batch reel of new cable waiting to be pulled through from one vault essentially to another vault. Here's some of the cable that's pulled out. Here's a close-up. That's what happens that you've got to find. I mean, it's basically exploded. I use the technical term fried. That cable is fried. So we've got.
So is that a cable you pulled out?
That's a cable we pulled out, and that's what caused the outage, and that cable has failed. So we pulled out, and you've got to pull out hundreds of feet of cable and then replace it again underground.
Can I ask you really just,
Sure.
I don't know if you covered this, how long does it take before the department knows exactly where the cause of the issue is? How long did it take for you to find out this was the cause of the outage?
Like Dave said, in the overhead, it's typically fairly quickly because you'll see the wire down the neighborhood. Someone in the neighborhood will see a flash, and they'll call us and tell us, and that gives us an idea. When it comes to the underground, it could be as quick as 2 hours. If you see smoke, if you see a sign, if someone heard a noise right there, it can take as long as 10 hours to find the problem. Part of the problem we all face, is the fact that you don't go anywhere quickly. So in some cases, it can take our crews an hour to even get to the job. And then, these circuits can be a couple miles in length, so we have to sectionalize it down. So each one is a little different, but it could be 2 hours, it could be 8 hours to just find the problem and then what's required to fix it.
Yeah, and that's oftentimes what the public doesn't understand. Is
Right.
in order for you to fix the problem, you need to identify where it's at.
Correct.
And how long it takes you to do that is anywhere between the hours you just mentioned, yeah.
Here's a picture of an underground vault. I mean, all you can see, if there's a 2-mile-long section, is that one of those little holes, the conduits, where the cable goes through. And this is somebody about to feed new cable into one of those holes. There's us at the job. For response, we were running our staff 16-hour shifts. There are some utilities that run staff 24 hours. I can't believe ever putting somebody dealing with high voltage after 24 hours of work and thinking that it would be safe. So after 16 hours, we rotate the staff home. They go home and sleep for 8 hours, then come back. We had about 500 people working each day. Friday, we just said to everybody, you got to stay past your shift. We brought crews in from Lone Pine, Bishop, Mojave, Victorville, and contractors. So we had everybody working that we could. And they worked on repairs. The first initial effort is get power restored. It might be a temporary repair, and then we kept crews on in the shift through about a week later because they had to then go back and make the permanent repairs that to ensure that we didn't have another outage. Here's what takes time. This is an underground vault. So old cable has lead in it. So you've got to now do a splice with new cable that doesn't have lead versus old cable. To do a splice can take 16 hours because you've got all that. You're in an underground situation. It takes a long time. It's one of the underground cable, way more reliable, but boy, when it breaks, it takes a long time to fix. Here's just, again, a cable being put in, but all the things where you have to go in, you have to find everything, you have to do inspections, you have to feed the cable in. It takes a long time.
There's Marty.
Yeah. As I told Marty, whenever it's good news, there'll be my bald head. Whenever it's bad news.
Actually, if I can just say this, I mean, and I said this to Marty the other day, I think he's one of your best spokespeople.
He is fantastic.
He really just told it like it was, and it wasn't too technical, it didn't go over people's heads, and people appreciate that.
Yeah.
When you're just honest and simplify the issue. And I think that's what I appreciated. I actually saw him on the news when he was on, and I said, yeah, he's great.
So, and
No,
we were.
I don't mean to negate your comms team, but
No,
I thought Marty did an
I
excellent
appreciate
job.
because
that day.
this shows that the direction we were trying. We're doing human interaction on TV, then doing Nextdoor, Facebook, Twitter, trying to use everything we could. But what people wanted to know is how long am I going to be out, and when is my power going to go back on? And it got to the point where it's going to take 24 to 48 hours. And I've got a few things that we're going to be improving this over every outage because we do. What I found, people want to know, even if you say we're working on it, we still don't know. They like that we're working on it, so that there's a knowledge, there's an awareness that we know what's going on. There's some of Facebook, there's some Twitter, there's some Nextdoor. We had 200 customer reps on. We usually have 10,000 calls over the weekend. We had 9,000 almost. We just had a tremendous amount. Again, the frustration, even with all those staff on, it was a long wait time because there were so many people out. Again, usual restoration, very hard when it's to this extreme. And that's the permanent repairs. What are we doing? Looking at all of the circuits, just like you've heard about water pipes, we grade our power lines. Water's like how many leaks, how old's the pipe, how many repairs have been. This is how old's the system, how many outages are it, what do we expect? And so we do have a list. And in fact, this will show you. Here's the lower level voltage lines. Here's the districts that we recognize and call them the neighborhoods, how many circuits need to be repaired. And frankly, it could be, projected that a circuit's going to be repaired next year, and there could be a major outage, and it could defer one, bring some of them faster and move some back a little farther. Then this is the lowest voltage, and the next lowest voltage, again, here's the cable replacements by that grading system, by that prioritization. This shows where we'll be working, and this is the higher level circuit upgrades. Again, all of those graded, all of those prioritized, and scheduled for replacement. One thing that we've done in the past, so I'm going to simplify this, in order to be the most responsive to customers and have zero outages to the level that we can, we'll go in and say we need to replace a system in one day. We go in the day before and we do a lot of work to switch them to a different circuit. Then we go and do the repairs the next day, and the day after we come in and move them back to their original circuit. So to do that one-day repair so they have no outage, it's 3 days worth of work. What we're going to do now is what all other utilities do, which is they send you a letter and say, on I don't know, March 7th, you're going to be out from 8 in the morning till 3 while we do a repair. We don't have that first day. We don't have the last day. The customer's going to be out. Again, all other utilities do that. We've just been so sensitive to not ever have any sort of outage. Those planned outages are way better than the unplanned outages. And again, that perfect world example I gave you, we could do 3 times the infrastructure improvement in the same amount of time. Now, if a job's a little longer, the setup, but that is how Edison does it. That's how everyone does it. And we will have those planned outages to get a much faster investment to stop those unplanned outages. We're also, interestingly enough, looking at our hiring efforts. Frankly, our power line technicians and our dispatchers could leave our employment tomorrow and make a lot more money, those 2 classifications elsewhere, and we're working with Local 18. We did on the linemen already, and we have seen the retention of a significantly a number of our staff not graduating from their 4-year apprentice program and in 2 months getting huge cash bonuses to go to Edison, because that's what was happening. Dispatchers, you could go tomorrow and make $10,000 more a year just by moving to it. So we've got to look at those and make sure that we are paying market rates for specific positions. We've also got to look at the traffic ordinance. So our staff work 9 or 10-hour days, and we can only essentially work on most major streets between 9 and 3, basically between 9 and 3:30. And when you look at setting up the traffic cones, taking down the traffic cones, you start looking at there's about 4 to 5 hours of work that can be done in a 10-hour day. And so that can take a repair or an infrastructure replacement to take 2 to 3 weeks. If we could work 24/7, it could take 2 to 3 days. And maybe it would be 5 days, but we can do 2 days on a weekend. So we're going to be coming back with some requests to look at some of those restrictions and determine, are there some instances where it would be way better to say, sorry, it's going to, and give advance notice, this street's going to be closed for 3 days, rather than have it closed for 5 hours over a 3-week period of time.
Can I just ask you on that point? If you could work 24 hours a day, obviously that would be better. But what's stopping you from just staffing up your night crews? You have 24-hour employees. Why don't you do more work at night?
Well, and I'll let Andy answer. But the more we do at night, there are then the fewer crews to go do work during the day or respond to outages during the day. But Andy, you can.
Well, we can shift our crews some to night. Some of the work that typically it's not, with the hazards involved, some of it's just not safe to do at night. We do it during storms, we do it during emergencies, but part of the issue is the noise in the communities, right? We're required anything at night to get a noise variance, and that becomes as difficult sometimes as getting an exemption from the 9 to 3 waiver. So we're cognizant of the fact that we make noise. For us to really do that, the optimal time to do it would be between 10 o'clock and 6 in the morning. But we're doing this on people's property lines, or we're doing it in their backyards or in the front of their houses. And so we've traded off with the traffic for the noise, which becomes as big an issue.
Right, but the peak hour restrictions only apply to the major thoroughfares. So we're not talking about people's backyards. You're talking about Ventura Boulevard.
Right, but even with those, and in some cases we do a lot of work at night, but there are times when We really, to make it effective, we really need longer than that. And we do, like I said, we do work, we bring crews in at 10 o'clock and we work them through the day. We do that a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, so we've got to look at, the big thing here again was incident command and public information. So we've now moved to a point where we are going to have an incident commander for every outage, a media representative also at the electric trouble desk, and coordination, a special customer service liaison for electric trouble. So there'll be a much greater number of people that can be contacted and then sending out information. Again, what we found is customers would just like to know you know about the outage, and it's going to be worked on, and that's way better than not knowing anything. We've got an outage management system that's on the web or can be accessed on a phone or an iPad, and it shows where the outages are. We're going to upgrade that system so it provides even better feedback, and we're going to also have staff report on a much more incremental basis. Yes, we've arrived. Yes, we've gone into the vault. This is what we're finding. It's going to take this long. And so there'll be more, rather than saying, hey, there's an outage, there'll be a status that's more detailed than there is right now. We've looked at the post-incident and have a whole bunch of things to do, but some of the ones in yellow are really important. Take the longer planned outages to make the system work better, faster. Look at the rush hour exemptions that are needed. Improve the timeliness of entering the information into the outage management system. All of these other things looked at, assigned to the different lead divisions. Another one is the voice response system, so people can call in and just leave a message, or they can hear a message, here's where our outages are, and they won't stay on hold for 8 minutes, they can just hear it. Again, look at the outage management system. Start getting a texting capability, which the current outage management system won't do, but we're putting them in a new one, which in the next couple months, we should start being able to do a pilot program for texting outage information. And then again, a number of things. We're also looking at what's called a distribution automation effort, which it will tell us more proactively where there's outages. Because it sounds kind of hard to believe, but we only know there's an outage when somebody calls us. And so we've got to put in a distribution automation system so that we can have a much more detailed area and see, okay, someone on this street is out. So we then know and we can dispatch somebody rather than waiting for someone to call us. Just some repairs. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Mr. O'Farrell, did you want to?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, food for thought in relation to the benefit of undergrounding all utilities. I think that we should have that discussion based on this incident that for it's another time. And then a window in terms of the heat event, separate it just for a moment from the problems that it caused with our utilities. But the window here is that these heat events are invariably going to affect the valley much more than they will the basin. This was kind of a one-off. And with climate change as part of our reality now, we have to be able to anticipate that. So Mr. Wright, your response has been so comprehensive, and I appreciate your recommendations and your proactivity since this July 6th event, because we are living in a sudden and extreme weather patterned world at this point. You answered most of my questions that I had. You talked a lot about staffing, and I'm sure at some point you'll come back to the council with your future staffing needs in relation to incidents like this. And I look forward to hearing more details about that. But you did convey that you feel that you have adequate staffing right now to deal with the objective immediately in front of us. So that's good to hear. In terms of the distribution automation system, about when might that be up and running?
So the RFP is going out in the next month or so, and then there'll be an evaluation, and essentially that's setting up an entire citywide communication system that's tied in thousands of points to our system. So the RFP will go out. Bluntly, it'll be 5 years before we go from from the start of the RFP issuance to its 100% finished. But we can get a lot of the major connections done, so we can, again, start bringing it down to neighborhoods before we bring it down to streets.
Okay, all right. And the fact that one of the best practices is to be able to provide more accurate outage time estimates. There was an issue with that on this July 6th incident. And then lastly for me, the whole peak hour restrictions piece. It seems to me that we have a bit of a cookie cutter approach on peak hour restrictions anyway. For example, anticipating the flow of traffic toward the center city and the outflow of traffic away from. So it seems to me that we could take a look at how those traffic patterns could positively affect longer work times depending on what side of a major boulevard you're working on. I know in my own neighborhood, and I live at the urban core, but for example, if you had to do work on Fletcher Drive, it would make sense to limit one lane of traffic if you're heading sort of eastward than if you're heading westward, right? So I think maybe working with DOT on regular traffic patterns might be able to open up some other windows of opportunity for a longer work day in relation to the work hour peak time restrictions. But thank you, and Madam Chair, I'll have some recommendations at the end of this.
Okay, are there any other questions? Mr. Koretz, go ahead.
So I might have missed it, but are we looking at the fact that we know we're going to have hotter and hotter days, or are we anticipating 120-degree days, 125-degree days, and what that will do to our system? Because obviously we don't want to hit those days without anticipating the changes, but we know in, hard to say how many years, 10 years, I'm sure we'll be hitting 120-degree days, if not several degrees more.
So our engineering staff is now looking at hotter and colder extremes. They're looking at designing more resilient facilities, and then Andy and his crews are installing those more resilient facilities. I talked about a 4 kV and a 33 kV. The lower lines tend to serve fewer people, and it takes a lot more investment to maintain them. We're looking at increasing those to higher voltages so that we'll have a higher capability of delivering power to people when they really need it. And frankly, what we're finding, places where they didn't have air conditioning 40 years ago. San Pedro is a great example. Everyone went out either, last year, the year before, or this year, and they bought 3-room air conditioners, threw them on their house, and we didn't build the system to handle, every house having 3-room air conditioners. It sometimes doubles and triples the load, so we're looking now at how do we do the engineering and infrastructure replacement to handle significantly more customer demand, because not only on some of the normal days it's going higher, but these climate extremes, you can see the customer demand increase by 10, 15, 20% from the day before. So it's phenomenal, and we're taking that into account because it's the reality of the future.
So is the only problem if you hit a 125-degree day or 130-degree day, is it only the demand, or is it also, at what point can your equipment not hold up?
Right. A lot of that is also, if it hits a high peak and then it cools off at night, that can be tremendously helpful. But what happened here, people turn on their air conditioning, they don't go off for 5 days, when that doesn't usually happen. The infrastructure that's older and tends to be kind of on the verge of having an issue, it all starts hitting because it just doesn't have a time to cool off. So it's heat, it is age of infrastructure. It's why we're ramping up the investment that you supported is going to have impacts. It's going to take a while to catch up from that long period of not investing enough.
And I was surprised that the Beverly Grove area wasn't on the list of the ones that was hardest hit. I live in it, although it's clearly on more than one system, because I think I had one outage, and probably in the worst part of that section, people complained about 4 outages in July. Is there a reason why that particular area has been hit hard? And Is it extra development that's to blame?
It's
Larger
extra
homes?
development. It's a lot of that area. You know, part of the issue, when you look at where the valley was built sort of later in the 60s, 70s. The metro and those areas were built much earlier. And the infrastructure in those areas is older. So, you know, when we had the heat waves in 2006, 2007, where we had the number of transformers fail, right, we invested a lot of money and time through our reliability program in the valley, because that's where the heat hit and that's where the typical problems came. And you saw with this heat wave where even though it was hotter in the valley, the ratio of outages was 5-to-1 on the metros and on the metro side to the valley, because that infrastructure investment is paid off. Well, now's the time we have to start focusing now on that metro and that inner city area, because again, we're going to have these kind of temperatures throughout the city again. So that's where our focus is now. But that area is older. In a lot of those areas, we have done a lot of work in some of the stations there, but again, we have over 1,400 4.8 kV circuits in the city, and that it's going to take us, you know, a good 20 years to go through and invest and upgrade all of those.
So I'm not sure my constituents will be happy to hear that they'll be having, you know, 5 or 10 outages a summer for the next 20 years. How do we get to that?
I don't think that will be the case, but for each of them. But we will continue to have outages. But at this point in time, again, one of the, you know, when we went a good, I came through the power system. I've worked in the power system my time. I started as a groundman. I, you know, worked my way through the system. The amount of time it takes to replace a circuit. So our circuit is kind of divided. It's a little technical, but into a feeder part and the circuit. To replace a whole circuit will take us a year for each one. So that's the reality is that's 1,400 circuits. You know, but we do multiple, you know, we're at 50 miles of cable a year, but that's 3,600 miles of cable that we have to upgrade over time. So we prioritize the ones we have issues on. The reality is, even if we had enough staff to replace them all in a year, we would gridlock the city to try to do it.
Right,
So,
we'd all want to kill you if you did that, because nobody would be moving anywhere.
Nobody would be moving, right, you know.
But that would only be in their districts, because my district, we go without power and we don't complain about it because we're not as loud. Eventually we get light and the power gets restored.
Well, you know, like I said, having done this for so long, I mean, I managed our electric trouble section for 8 years and managed that response. I'm excited about the distribution automation system when we get that implemented, because at that point we can implement, you know, switches that will sectionalize the trouble and get people back on right away. It will tell us on an underground area where the fault is, so we'll be able to get to that. And instead of spending 2 or 3 hours just trying to find the problem, we'll be making repairs as soon as we arrive. So I'm excited about that. You know, I probably won't be around here long enough to see it fully implemented. But you know, I live in Edison territory. It frustrates me when I have an outage, and I completely understand that it's frustrating to people. And honestly, we are working diligently to solve the problems. We're working diligently to identify, and we constantly refine our priorities based on, you know, issues happen, to try to get and fix the ones that are the biggest issue first. But it's going to take a while.
And are we doing anything to do outreach to the areas that have had the highest problems? And
we do. We go meet with the neighborhood councils. We go out and talk to them. We've been to basically almost all of the communities now, and we continue to go out and talk to them to let them know what the issues are, and you know, we want them to be part of the process with us.
Just send Marty out. Marty enjoys those conversations.
Absolutely.
I'm sure he's had a great summer having those conversations.
And it's hard to be mad at Marty. Right?
You know, what's to be mad at Marty? Marty is just Marty.
And one last question. So if people made claims for ruined food or ruined refrigerated medicine, anything like that across the city, what does DWP do? Should we discourage people from doing it? Do we ever pay those claims, or should we just tell people not to file them?
An outage is, perfect service cannot be guaranteed. An outage is an anticipated event. We hate that people sometimes lose a freezer of food, depending on when they've gone shopping, but it's essentially not considered an item that we reimburse every person every outage, because it's considered an expectation that you'll occasionally have an outage.
Oh, yeah, just.
So, did you have two more questions for Mr. Kokori and then Mr. O'Farrell to end this?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This chart on page 3 that shows the historical investments in the power structure, is this in 2018 dollars, or is this show adjustments for inflation?
It is the actual amount that was there during that.
So we see a doubling in the last decade or so, which would pretty much be consistent with inflation and the cost of money over that time. I see the ratepayer advocate is shaking his head. Am I not right about that?
You want to come to the table, Mr. Pickle?
You can come on up. This was going to be a simple question.
There was another handout,
you're shaking your head, that concerns
Mr. Kokorian, there was another handout on the electric service reliability. I'm not sure if, is this the one you're talking about?
No, it's this chart.
We've looked at this a different way. In a chart that's not in this setup, we looked at DWP's capital spending versus others in the industry. And in the early 2000s, DWP was in the first quartile, that is, least amount of spending on capital. Now we're on the edge between third and fourth quartile, but we're still playing catch up.
Sure. Well, and that's actually not different than what I was going to say, which is that if that's the case, what this shows is that from, at the time before 2000, we were lagging hugely behind inflation. So this sort of flat investment here was not coming close to keeping up even with the cost, the increased cost. So it's this deficit that we're now trying to make up for, and still playing catch up. So I think it's important that the public understand that despite this increased expenditure in infrastructure, we still have a ways to go before we're even back to sort of even in this. Okay, so then my question was, it never occurred to me, and all the time I've worked on renewable energy issues for the last more than 10, 15 years, I've never thought about this until you just described it. But when you talked about the spiky demand that comes from climate change and the reduced predictability of the load curve now, even over the course of a day, when you overlay that with the intermittency of many renewables, that's always been a problem, but it seems like it's an even bigger problem because of the changes in the load curve now, right? And so I guess my question as it pertains to this is, does that affect the distribution grid? It's certainly going to affect transmission, it's going to affect grid reliability and all that, but does it affect the, is your distribution equipment able to handle, I guess, that spikiness, or does that compound the problem we already have from having old infrastructure?
I think what it changes, what I've seen is, and especially here in this scenario, what it changed is the behavior of the residents, right? I have solar at my house, right? I live in Acton where it's hot. Because I have solar in the day and my electricity bill is cheaper, my wife runs my AC 24/7.
Yeah.
And so when typically in the past, people are more likely before solar, as it starts to cool down at night, to turn their air conditioning off. But we see that pattern that before we didn't see it because it's behind the meter.
Right.
Right? That load that we don't see because of their solar. Well, either when, there was a few times here where for a period clouds came over, right, and that caused that intermittency. So that load dropped, and all of a sudden that load hit our system. And it hit the infrastructure.
Let me make it a little bit simpler, because it's a very discrete question, because not all of our renewables is distributed generation. We have a lot of utility scale solar and everything else. What I'm asking is, on the distribution grid, like when we had the problems with water, Mr. Koretz's district got flooded, and many of our other, we had these breaks. A lot of the reporting was, well, is this because of spikes in water flow? Is it because there's more pressure on the pipes, and is that causing? I'm just wondering if there's a similar thing with electricity, that because we have a spikier load now, does the distribution grid get strained because of that?
On a normal day, no. Again, that's what the point I was trying to get to is, in a heat wave like this, it does, because people's usage patterns change. So they use their AC longer during the night, right? So the load continues. I think Mr. Wright kind of said, when typically during the night, people tend to open windows and sort of let the air blow through and kind of cool their houses. And the system gets a chance to cool down and sort of reset for the next day. When that load, the heat, really what drives the problems on our system is the load. Now the heat drives the load because it drives increased power usage, but the system doesn't get to reset. And I think the behavior where we run our ACs longer because it doesn't cost as much, because I don't have a bill for much for the daytime. I'm really only paying for the evening. So that's where we've seen in these kind of situations where on the distribution system, the distributed resources sort of impact it.
I would say, don't. What you're saying is right. The spike isn't like a 20-minute spike. The spike will be 2 days long. Okay. So that spike hits, and then it doesn't cool down, and that 2 to 3 day spike that's out of the expected norm, that does impact and hit the system and causes the life, what might have been expected to last another 10 years, it fries. Okay. That happens. So yes, these extremes cause issues.
I just want to acknowledge Mr. O'Farrell before we end with you, is that we have our ratepayer advocate, Mr. Pico. I know you introduced a document for our consideration. Did you want to have a couple of minutes to just go over it?
Why don't I jump to the last page?
Okay, perfect. The document I'm referring to is the Measuring Electric Service Reliability. You want to jump to the last page?
Sure. The last page, there are three trends. In some ways, this is repeating what DWP had said, but a little differently. One, there's a third common utility industry statistics called restoration time. That is, if you're out, what's the expected time before you're going to be back for the different utilities? DWP is in the middle nationally on that statistic, but among their California peers, they're toward the bottom. And while the frequency of outage is typically related to how well is the system built, the restoration times are often driven by staffing. And staffing often gets pinched in these major events. So that's the first trend. The second trend is continued proactive investment in things like the power system reliability infrastructure is very important. And there are two implications for that. One, we have to keep going and ramping that up. But to do that, you need what we all hate to say, regular rate reviews. Third, distribution automation is expected to help. And it's good DWP is investing those funds. Distribution automation sometimes reaches down to smart meters, and some people's consideration, they're starting with the basics rather than going to smart meters right away. That's the right approach. I think we need to think carefully before we switch to the smart meter component. Areas for improvement, better communications, you've talked about that already. Increased field staffing levels along with adapting constraints that make it tough to get apprentices trained through the system and limits the number of apprentices they can train at one time. And third, regular reporting on circuit upgrades and the selection criteria for those upgrades. General Manager Wright talked about that, and we second that, and we applaud DWP doing a public process on that. So key things, we need more field staff. And all the other things, let's keep going.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So colleagues, what I recommend is obviously approve the motion. Thank you for the wonderful presentation and your work that went into this and your comprehensive approach to explaining all of the challenges and opportunities and the progress that we're making. So what I'd like to do is also require a detailed list of infrastructure upgrades currently underway and the projected timelines for those upgrades, including details and timelines for the distribution automation system. Because I gather that in this 5-year window that you talked about, we'll start seeing some communication improvements along the way before it's fully implemented. So colleagues, I'd like to request that of the department if you're agreeable.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so let's go, if there's no other questions on this item, let's go ahead and approve the motion with the outlined of detailed list that Mr. O'Farrell is requesting. Okay, without objection, that will be the order. Thank you, Mr. Wright. Gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to items number 1 and 2. We'll take those up together. If I can have staff come up to the table. While they get settled, Mr. Prieto, can you read both items into the record for us, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Item number 1 relates to Bureau Sanitation report dated September 25th, 2018, relative to drafting a plastic straws on request ordinance applicable to food and beverage facilities and related matters. And number 2, motion Blumenfield O'Farrell relative to feasibility of implementing a plastic utensils on request ordinance and related matters. You have staff before you.
Yeah, and before we get started, thank you. Before we ask Sanitation to go ahead and give us a presentation, I want to give Mr. O'Farrell an opportunity, since he's the author of the motion, to make opening comments, if you will, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you and I co-introduced this initiative some months ago, and it was commensurate with the state taking action led by Assemblymember Ian Calderon. So I commend the state for taking action in relation to dealing with our plastic straw proliferation, what I would call a crisis. And what we announced today is taking it a few steps further. And I'm encouraged by the level of collaboration we've had, not only with environmentalists, Heal the Bay and others who are here and represented today, but also the industry, and specifically McDonald's and other restaurants that we've been dialoguing with for many, many months. And we know that we have urgent needs and time certain in terms of what this planet will be able to handle with the proliferation of plastics in our oceans. Some of the speakers today talked about the 5 gyres. Well, we know that one of the gyres, which was about the size of the state of Texas 14 or 15 years ago, is now twice the size of the state of Texas, and it's 1.6 million square kilometers, and it exists between California and Hawaii. We know that 500 million straws are used daily in the United States, according to National Geographic. 8.3 billion straws pollute the world's beaches. Currently, 8.3 billion with a B. Plastic straws are in the top 10 of debris items found on our beaches, as again was conveyed by some of the speakers today. 8 million tons of plastic flow into the ocean every year. There will be more plastic by weight than fish in the ocean by 2050, according to the World Economic Forum, if we don't change our practices. Now, even though straws are a small percentile of the total plastic count in our oceans, they have an outsized role in terms of they are the top 10 discarded items found on our beaches. We've all seen the horrific image of the sea turtle with a straw we know up its nose, and we all know that marine life consumes plastic products, including straws, and they're tricked into believing that it's food and actually starve to death because of ingesting plastic in our oceans. So we have an opportunity, and we know that with the new state law that is now in place, it requires straws on request only for restaurants, for sit-down restaurants, but doesn't address the fast food industry. And again, I want to compliment McDonald's, and we know that this represents a change, and it requires acclimating in terms of financials with small businesses, and we get that. But we know that we can bring them along, and McDonald's has done that in relation to the straws upon request everywhere. Furthermore, this morning, Ms. Martinez and I announced a phase-out of all plastic straws by 2021 in the city of Los Angeles. And we encourage, over the next 2+ years, for manufacturers to work together to pioneer products that are environmentally biodegradable, recyclable, and we think that the average person who will request a straw will have a greater awareness of the consequences of using a plastic straw that will either end up along our beaches and in our oceans, or in our lakes, our streams, our rivers, and the consequences thereof, and in our landfills, of course, too. So I look forward to hearing this report, and then, of course, we'll have the conversations and make some recommendations related, in my view, today, specific to plastic straws. So thank you to the Bureau for your work on this, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Okay, before we get to questions, why don't we go ahead and have the department give us the presentation.
Okay, good afternoon. Alex Helou, I'm the Assistant General Manager for LA Sanitation, overseeing solid resources programs. Joining with me today is Jennifer Pinkerton and James Malden, who will be doing a quick presentation. I think a lot of these items have been touched on by Councilman O'Farrell. I want to start by thanking Councilman O'Farrell and Councilmember Martinez for their leadership on this crucial environmental issue. In 2014, the city of Los Angeles became the largest city in the country to eliminate used plastic bags, single-use plastic bags. And today, as Angelinos, we have the opportunity to reduce our environmental footprint and address the plastic straws pollution problems. Providing straws on request help prevent plastic waste by ensuring that straws are distributed only to those who need it. As part of this motion, LA San staff met with multiple industry groups, businesses, and associations to ensure their needs and concerns are addressed. In this report, which you have in front of you, we have multiple recommendations that are designed to strengthen the city environmental leadership. Also, a core of our recommendation is an exemption for medical facilities and people with disabilities. Since there have been changes on the state level, since this report has done, we would like to change recommendation number 1 in the report to read, request the city attorney to work with LA San on a proper CEQA clearance for the proposed ordinance. Finally, I want to give special thanks to CD 13 staff, Star and David, for their help, as well as Ackley with CD6. They were very crucial in helping us and guiding us through this process. And I'll turn to my staff for the quick presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just real quickly, I'll go over the background on this. We're here to report back on the feasibility of implementing the Straws on Request ordinance, alternatives to plastic straws that are available for restaurants and other food service providers, and current and potential legislation. Okay, next, on this straw, just a quick background. Paper straws were first introduced as a mechanism for protecting against communicable diseases. In the 1960s, those plastic straws became the most common that were offered. the United States was undergoing a societal change at that point. People started dining out more. We became more convenience-driven, and unfortunately, at that time, we were changing from a circular economy to a linear economy that was largely disposal-based. So their single-use disposable items were becoming more common at that time. From a business perspective, plastic straws, from a restaurant perspective, make complete sense. They're inexpensive, readily available, and because of the customer experience, they're more resilient in liquid. So it made complete sense that restaurants switch to plastic straws. And most straws that are out there now are either number 5 or number 6 plastic. But like with any other thing, we've had some unintended consequences. Most of these environmental impacts have been delineated multiple times, and today again at the press event. I will say straws, technically, plastic straws are recyclable, but due to their small size and the design materials recovery facilities, very few are ever captured. And against the advent of China's national sword policy, there is no demand for mixed plastics at this time. Now, even if properly disposed, plastic straws can leach toxic chemicals into soil and groundwater. As was noted earlier, litter. Straws are one of the most common items found during California coastal cleanups. And as numerous speakers talked about, plastic never goes away. It simply breaks up into smaller pieces that unfortunately are very effective mechanisms for accumulating and transporting toxins. Both Councilmembers Martinez and O'Farrell talked about the impact to marine life today, and the terrifying statistic there that at the current rates of use, that plastics of all type will weigh more than fish in the ocean in just a few decades. So that leads us next to feasibility, and in a word, very feasible for us to adopt this ordinance. As Alex mentioned, we spoke to or met with most of the major restaurant chains in the United States. And if you'll bear with me for a moment, I'm going to go in reverse order. Business concerns, of course, affect these restaurants, especially the impact to customers. Customers will have to now request straws instead of being provided them automatically. So that is a change, and there's obviously legitimate concern about a negative customer impact. Employees will have to be retrained to no longer offer these items. In bar settings, straws often are used to differentiate alcoholic from non-alcoholic beverages. Now, these last 2 bullet points, this is the industry looking ahead to a ban because bans have been adopted in multiple cities and around the world. Paper straws are the most viable alternative right now to plastic straws, but there is a supply problem and they are more expensive. There is only one U.S. manufacturer currently making paper straws. We ourselves have attempted to obtain a largish supply of those, and it's a 5-month wait. So supply is a problem currently. But all those things said, the industry by and large is embracing this with some tweaks. As you heard this morning, McDonald's owner and operators talking about the various environmental initiatives that McDonald's is adopting pertaining to their packaging. And we are very pleased to say that most of the industry is interested in collaborating with us on outreach because we have to do customer advisories. So with all that, I'm going to segue to James Malden to talk about the actual alternatives.
I will be discussing the alternatives to plastic straws. Before each of you, you have a little kit that outlines all the material types we have listed here, with the exception of wheat straw. Wheat straw is not readily commercially available at this time. So there are 2 categories that they could be separated out into. You have your disposable straws and your reusable straws. Your disposable straws are your straws that are suitable for most of the restaurant types you would encounter: sit down, dine in, take out, drive through, food trucks, etc. And as Jennifer mentioned earlier, paper is the most viable at this time. But currently there is only one U.S. manufacturer. There are other straws made in other countries such as China, but depending on the quality of the straw, it may degrade in a drink. And then the next 3, pasta, sugar, and wheat straw, these are more of sort of novelty straws. They wouldn't be applicable in most restaurant settings because of their cost and their and their tendency to degrade in drinks. And then for reusable straws, these would be more applicable for what's referred to as full-service dine-in restaurants. And these restaurants are where a waiter or waitress would seat a customer, and the customer would be served at their table and would receive the check at the table at the end. Or for the customer to bring with them to the restaurant. For example, you might go to a Starbucks and bring a reusable cup with this straw built into it. And the materials here are bamboo, glass, reusable plastic, silicone, and stainless steel. And the last two, silicone and stainless steel, are the types that we have noticed are used the most common by customers. Okay, and then that brings me to my next slide. So there has been action regarding straws on request, both on the state level and by cities throughout the state. The most recent of which is California Assembly Bill 1884, which was signed into law by Governor Brown on September 20th of this year and will become effective January 1st of 2019. This bill only applies to disposable plastic straws and would only apply, I believe as Councilmember O'Farrell mentioned, to dine-in restaurants, which are also would fall under the full-service restaurant category. So it would be a dine-in restaurant where you would be seated by a waiter or waitress. And during our conversation with Assembly Member Ian Calderon's office, they informed us that this law it's more of a foundation for local governments to expand upon. So if they decide they want to ban a certain item or make all straws on request, et cetera. And in addition to the state, there has been straws on request ordinances imposed in cities around California, cities such as Davis, Oakland, and San Luis Obispo. The cities of Davis and San Luis Obispo, these straws on request ordinances only apply to dine-in orders at restaurants, whereas Oakland, they do apply to all restaurants within the city. So that is a look at the current legislation that is.
Real quick, James, do you have any, do you know the year that Oakland imposed this? Do you have that information? What year?
They amended one of their existing ordinances for their food service ware. They amended it in, they amended it this year, actually, to
include all?
Yeah, to make those straws on request, yes.
Can I ask a quick question before you move on? So is it our understanding that AB 1884 does not have preemptive effect even as to full-service dine-in restaurants then?
Could you clarify what preemptive, I mean, it sets a low
Well, when the state legislature balances policies and enacts a law, they almost always preempt local ordinances in the area that they are legislating in. So unless it specifies otherwise,
I
thank
think
you.
we someone here who, can you identify yourself?
Yes, of course. My name is Adina Hopenstand. I'm General Counsel for Sanitation with the City Attorney's Office. The face of the law makes it clear that it allows for local ordinances to have more restrictive measures in place. So that's both in the legislative history and in the statute itself.
Very good.
Is that the
Thank you.
Calderon bill?
Yeah.
That's the Calderon bill, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Were you done?
Yes, I was actually. So if you have any questions, we'd be happy
All
to
right.
take them.
So, members, are there any questions, Mr. Kurtz?
Well, not a question, more a comment. I think we're, if anything, actually understating the danger of plastics because it's not only obviously dramatic that at some point we'll have more plastic than fish in the ocean, but we get 80% of our oxygen from the oceans, and as we kill off plant life and ecosystems, we actually could reach a point where we don't have enough oxygen to sustain life in the world. So one of the ways that we could extinguish ourselves in addition to climate change is allowing this incredible movement towards having plastics dominate our oceans continue. So I think that what we did with plastic bags and now straws, and we obviously have to continue this leadership until we get rid of this plastic-focused society that we've had in the last 50 or 60 years. We obviously survived without plastics before. We did just fine. It was a convenience, and nobody anticipated the dangers that I think people have been aware of for 20, 25 years. But all these changes are doable. It's just a question of a change in habit. In West Hollywood, we banned styrofoam in some circumstances 20 plus years ago, and McDonald's squawked, but they easily replaced their styrofoam packaging with paper packaging and had a big sign up saying, "Call your council members if you don't like our new packaging." And honestly, I never got a single call because people were fine with paper packaging. It worked just fine. We haven't gotten a lot of calls complaining about plastic bag elimination either. It's just changes in people's habits. People claimed the sky was going to fall. It didn't fall. But if we just continue down the path that we're going on with plastics in the oceans, and plastics also create the greenhouse gases and exacerbate climate change, and then in landfills they continue to exacerbate climate change. And one thing we should be watching out for as we reduce gasoline usage, which we're clearly trying to do to save the world with climate change, the industry intends to try and substitute more plastic packaging for that so they can continue to use the same amount of petroleum, but just use it for something else. So I think it's critically important that we push in this direction to get rid of our plastics and look at packaging and how we can reduce it, because otherwise we'll just be trading automobile use for plastic use and digging ourselves just as deep a hole. One other thing I should point out, the European Union released draft plans to ban single-use products, such as plates and beverage stirrers, etc., just yesterday. And I think it goes into effect by 2021. They also have provisions for plastic bottles and food containers and cigarette butts. And we should look at the same kind of big picture actions here in Los Angeles.
Mr. Kokori?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to you and Mr. O'Farrell for leading this effort. Thanks for staff for a very comprehensive, thorough report, analysis, consideration of the issues at length. I think this is long overdue, full speed ahead. The one comment I want to make as we move forward with drafting an ordinance and thinking about implementation is it's too early to pop the champagne corks and celebrate ourselves when we say that we should move forward with something like this unless we have an enforceability mechanism in place. And Mr. Kretz was just mentioning plastic bags, and it reminded me of how hard he worked, and I did, and Mr. Reyes did to enact that ordinance. And then yesterday, I was at Ralph's, and I saw big piles of plastic bags at every single register, except now they're using thicker plastic. And so it's no longer single-use plastic. And this is an example of how corporations will make every effort to evade the law if it is in their financial interests to do so. By every account, that is the same kind of plastic bag that we tried to ban. In fact, it's worse because they're using a thicker grade of plastic now. So we have to make sure that this ordinance is going to be enforceable, and I think that the best way to do that is to change behavior along the way ensure that consumer behavior is changing along the way, change the industry's behavior along the way, and we can do that by making sure we're having appropriate definitions that meet all of these sorts of needs that you identified. I guess that's my general comment, is because it's too early to actually get into wordsmithing this. But if we don't have something that's going to be enforceable and that's going to change consumer behavior along the way, we're not going to be as effective as we might be in doing this. And so I do think that we need to take in legitimate consumer concerns, legitimate business concerns as we discuss this, and figure out how are we going to address those concerns in a way that will, as Mr. O'Farrell said at the outset, through enacting legislation, we can shape behavior and they will adjust, but they're going to need time to adjust, and they're going to need to understand, what alternatives are available and what aren't available, both businesses and consumers, and we're going to have to help them to get there.
All right. So first of all, I just want to start with thanking Mr. O'Farrell and Mr. Blumenfield for your motion, sir. I like to give credit where credit is due, but part of my biggest concern is as we consider the long-term phase-out, what I don't want to see is that we simply choose one single-use item over another single-use item, because that waste ends up right back in my neighborhood. And the reason I mention that is because we often never hear about, the communities such as Sand Valley, who is home to most of the city's waste haulers and material recycling facilities. We talk about marine life, and we talk about our oceans, and we talk about coastal cleanups, and those are all great, and I'm glad people are participating. But the cleanups need to start exactly where we end up putting the city's trash, and that's not often what people talk about. Unfortunately, those people who live across the street from landfills cannot afford to be here this afternoon because they're working. But so what I would like us to see is, I'd like for us to start considering ideas that would help us overall remove the trash from our waste stream. And in your report, what I wanted to point out is, so in reading the report, it says that straws are recyclable. But due to their size, they're usually, what ends up happening is they usually slip through and they still end up in our landfills. Is that correct? So what I wanted us to focus on, and I'm going to include a couple of recommendations, so are you aware of the secondary recycling institutions? Such as the secondary recycling institutions like Titus that we have here in downtown. So my understanding is that they take residue waste for recycling facilities and reprocess them to make sure that they're catching all the recyclables that were possibly missed. Are you familiar with that facility?
Yes, Alex Hello for LA Sanitation. We did visit Titus facility. We've done pilots, or we tried to do pilots with them. They really focus more on material recovery facilities that does not capture as much material as the one we're using.
Right.
We are using facilities that have more advanced equipment. So when we were sending them samples, for example, from one of your district, Councilmember Martinez,
You were
from
sending trash? The
Well,
trash
no,
that
the
goes to my
recycling.
district, you were sending it back out of my
The
district?
leftover recyclables. The recyclables go in first, they capture the material, segregate it into different bales. But because of the size of the plastic, it really floats on top and then end up being in the trash. And some other recyclables happen the same thing. So we send load over. Unfortunately, they could not do much with those because the facilities we use in sanitation have high capture ratio. So Titus is not able to utilize those type of the leftovers, let's say.
I don't mean to interrupt you. So it's my understanding that they use these optical sorters that to find these recyclables that were possibly missed. So you're familiar with that technology?
Yes, the facilities we use all have optical sorters.
Okay.
So we have those. Titus is a great niche for those small material recovery facilities that do not have the optical sorters.
So what I'd like for us to think about is when you come back with the report on the phase-out of straws, I want you to also include something on the optical sorters, how they catch straws and other smaller recyclables that we probably missed the first time around. I want us to talk about that in the report. And the other question I had for you is either part of our residential sanitation program or our commercial waste program, do we require those loads to be processed through these secondary recycling institutions to make sure that we're limiting the waste stream? Are we using that secondary
We use the
recycling institutions as a
we use the
requirement?
secondary. There's only, there's Titus that everybody's aware of. It's over here. The issue is it's not advantageous. We have multiple meetings with Titus, and it's not advantageous for them to use the secondary because there is not enough recyclables
So
to make it worth the
we
time.
currently don't require residential sanitation program or the commercial waste program. We don't require those loads to go through the secondary recycling institution to make sure we have not missed a possible recycling item.
Actually, we require them something even more. We require them to have capturing over 90% of whatever we send them.
Say that again?
We require over 90% to capture the material. Now, the issue comes in with plastic number 5 that Jennifer mentioned, is that the markets, we used to make revenue of those plastics. So when we were capturing those plastics, number 5, whether it's the Tide bottles and some others, we were able to sell them and make close to $25 to $30 a ton.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with the markets have been in a decline, there's no markets for them. China is not accepting them. They go into Vietnam, Malaysia, and Southeast Asia. And so there is not markets for them. What we require under the recycler program is that they have to reach a diversion over 1 million tons from landfill.
Mm-hmm.
So it's advantageous to all the haulers to maximize the recyclables they're able to pull out from the stream.
All right, what I want us to do is I want to make sure that the report, when you bring back the phase-out discussion, that we also include the conversation about the optical sorters, how we can better utilize them, make sure we're hitting that so that we can catch the smaller recyclables that are possibly getting missed. That was my whole point.
Okay.
And I would really appreciate that if we can have that conversation as part of your report.
Absolutely.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Koretz.
Also, while we're looking at things, I wonder if we could look at if there's any way to find our own markets for these plastic items, whether we'd have to create a manufacturing plant somewhere in this country so that we could use them ourselves and recycle them. And also what our success rate is with recycling styrofoam. Because in theory, again, it's recyclable. I don't know how much we actually recycle, if any.
We can do that.
Okay. Very well. Mr. O'Farrell, I think you had 2 amendments to your motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great discussion from everyone on this panel. I really appreciate it. Just before I make these recommendations, just a few more anecdotals here. One is that just the other night, I was at a place in Hollywood, and right next to me, a young couple, a man and a woman, they were ordering a cocktail. And when the bartender handed them the plastic straws, they said, "Oh, no, thank you. We don't use single-use plastic anymore anywhere." I went to a restaurant months ago when we introduced this motion, and a restaurant manager said, "Oh, why don't you just ban them entirely?" And I said, "Well, there are differences of opinion in terms of a ban. However," she said, "my wait staff are about to commit mutiny. They want to stop offering plastic straws entirely to all their customers." We had a whole meeting about it. So I just want to say that especially the younger generations really have a sense of the hazards and the dangers that plastics pose in our natural environment and the consequences of our personal choices. So I think that's a good thing. And we know that Jalisco, Mexico, has banned all forms of plastic.
They have been for a while.
And so they're doing it there, and that's a coastal state. Los Angeles is a coastal city, so I think we have a larger responsibility. And you're right, Madam Chair, it's not just the ocean, it's our landfills. Right. When we do LA River cleanups, it is noticeably freer of plastic bags, noticeably, and it's wonderful. However, when you get into the river and you try to pick up these smaller pieces, the plastic straws are just embedded in that sand and they will not come out. So they're with us for a while. And then also in Ireland and England, McDonald's again showed leadership there. They've gone to only recyclable straws there. we have the economy of scale in Los Angeles. As I mentioned earlier, plastic straws have an outsized role in the harm they cause the environment, but Los Angeles has an outsized role in how we influence others. So we have the economy of scale here, and we have partners, and manufacturers have 2 years, 2 full years, to get in the act of lower cost, biodegradable, recyclable, compostable straws and other products, because this is the way of the near future, and that's a good thing. And the Los Angeles market will support that innovation, and that's a good thing. So I say let's utilize what we have and the resources we have and the support and the movement that we're part of, and it's a wonderful thing. So, Madam Chair, therefore, I recommend the following, that we approve the sanitation report recommendations with the following amendments and additions. Instruction number 2, to include the following language. Food and beverage facilities with drive-through operations will be allowed to inform drive-through patrons that they have an option to obtain straws if requested. Additional instructions are as follows. Instruct the Bureau of Sanitation to report in 90 days on the feasibility of implementing a plastic straws phase-out ordinance by 2021. And 2, this is very, very important, and we've had lots of conversations previous to this hearing, so I'll daylight that right now. Instruct the Bureau of Sanitation to work with the Department of Disability and the CLA to convene a working group, including community members associated with the Department of Disability, to report on methods and approaches to mitigate impacts to the disabled community associated with the plastic straws phase-out. And those are my recommendations, and in addition to yours, Madam Chair, in relation to the optic sorters.
Yeah, and Mr. Koretz had additional
I just have a
comments.
question, or maybe we can just add it to the report. Obviously, paper would be better than plastic, but I don't know if we've looked at the life cycle implications of when we make this change, if we make it to plastic as opposed to elimination of this excess. Will we wipe out a forest in Brazil if all our plastic straws suddenly become paper straws? And what the water impacts will be and all that. So I wonder if we could take a look at that as well.
Okay, very well. Then I'm going to go ahead and move that we approve item number 2 as submitted. Without objection, that will be the order. And then item 1, we will move to approve the sanitation report as amended by Councilmember O'Farrell.
Madam Chair, actually one modification on item number 1. The recommendation having to do with the neg deck. My understanding is that the department no longer needs that.
Okay.
So we could simply strike that recommendation.
That's fine. So strike the recommendation. All right, got it.
If we can request the city attorney to work with us on the CEQA clearance for item 1.
Yeah, that was your addition.
Yeah.
Yeah, you made that clear during your opening statements.
Record? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Without objection, that will be the order. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.